Hi everybody, welcome back. I somewhat misled you here, I think, and I need to kind of backtrack and describe this. So what we did initially with the galaxy, and that was simply putting in relative zones that would be grouped together that are basically dynamic in nature, that could be deployed and grouped. However, I mentioned that there are times that are certain policies that we need to have the zones delegated to the server specifically instead of using the galaxy. And we're back to that point with the dynamic DNS. So the first thing we're going to need to do here is we're going to change this around. I apologize for having the extra, but we did get our DNS deployed. Now we just need to change it. So we're going to delete this master, if it'll let us do it. And we're going to get rid of that altogether. And then what we're going to need to do is take a couple extra steps here so that we can enable the DNS Listener function, which is only enabled on the server by server basis for the primary. So we need to go to the DNS primary and do add DNS zone, and we're going to select master. We're going to tell it, we're going to do our internal first. The automatic glue records is fine, the include. And then here, this is what the option I needed, the allow DNS listener to accept zone transfers. So when we start to implement DHCP dynamic DNS, it updates DNS dynamically. We then want to tell the dynamic DNS to update IPControl. Do an also notify. We capture the zone transfer and import it into the database. We then audit it and update the domain. So we do all of that in this single transaction by that checkbox. So I need you to add these zones here, and so that's what we're going to do. And then we can use the address match list that we've already created. All right. And that should be sufficient. I don't think we need any additional zone options. We can use the defaults of the server. But if we needed to, we could come down to that level. All right. So there's the primary for the forward. Let's do the same for the reverse. Master, and then we're going to tell it the 10. That's our space. And we'll tell it to enable dynamic updates here as well and to capture the PTR record dynamic update too. All right. So now here we need to redeploy these configurations to the primary DNS. We're going to override all files, and this is going to give an error message because it's dynamic, and we know that. So the first time that we're really enabling this dynamic DNS is fine. However, after this process, as we start dynamically updating DNS, the primary maintains a local journal, and that local journal gets played back every time it restarts. So if that journal ever gets lost, which in all files deploy will do, that journal no longer exists. So if those journals weren't captured by the listener and weren't already in the database so that we could redeploy them, you would be missing records. So we give you a message. You should never really deploy the master all files except to overwrite that and except by explicit users who with certain privileges, who know how to fix it, and then you can disable that in the administrator function, which we'll come back to. So now we have this set up. It's all set up for the master. We're good. Now, since we've enabled this, we also need to come back and deploy the DHCP configuration because it was unaware of the dynamic nature of the zone and what the primary IP and other IPs were. So we're going to tell it to update the failover, stop on errors, ignore that, and tell it to redeploy. This will deploy to both the primary and the failover. And each one of those tasks then it goes through, you'll see it's config transfer, and it goes through it sequentially as it does that. And let's see where we're at here. All right, and we're done. So now on the DHCP, it should know how to handle dynamic DNS. The primary should know how to handle DNS. And we should be able to effectively go in and assign an IP address and dynamically deploy it, which we're going to do real quick just to verify that that is the case. So let's go into our subnet, and let's choose our test one here. We'll grab this client. Let's do static. We'll do unknown just for the heck of it. I'll come back and tell you about the dynamic name here and eventually. But now this particular checkbox here is going to create these resource records. and then it's going to create a task that's going to dynamically update the primary DNS. And what we hope to see here is that everything goes smoothly, the dynamic address is assigned and is specified there. Tells you the scope here as well, so if you wanted to do searches for this, you could see it, but also we're going to use that to go out and query this just to confirm that it's all there. All right, so we should be able to okay, and there's your address. Now, on the flip side of all of this, if we go in and delete this, it's going to delete this IP, it'll delete the address, the PTR, and again, it should if we do the reverse here too. I'm going to change this. Okay, and there's your PTR record. So that's the setup of dynamic DNS. Now, the way we had to set up is last in, effectively. So if another device comes in, or this device with the same MAC comes in, with that IP address, it's going to break down the old lease and set up the new lease in DNS. So it removes the old DNS entries and adds the new DNS entries. So it's going to continue to do that as it moves throughout the environment. And aside from that, that then is going to capture, well, that's in the DNS only. So we got one more task, sorry. One more thing we need to do. And in that DNS, on the primary, we have the dynamic DNS entry on the primary, but it hasn't been told to do anything with it yet. So what we need to do is go back to the primary, click on the Options tab, Show All Product Options, and we want to go and define the also notify and do an add and specify the IP address of the executive system. In my case, 10.10.02. It'll default to 53 or 5053, and we have ways of routing that internally. And now, on this particular config, we need to deploy just the configuration to the primary. I'm going to select it, do configuration only, tell the stop start on errors, copy the last config. And again, I just like to watch tasks when I'm doing this in testing. So we'll see how the status is. There we go. We'll slow in this virtual environment. I've got a lot of systems here. All right, so now we're good. All of the DNS and dynamic DNS should be set up for these particular domains. I apologize again for the Galaxy, but that is how you would set up domains still for the internal profiles for the slave servers. So those are still applicable here. Whenever you have a resolver that needs to copy over those same domains, you would add them as a Sapphire appliance. You would then, that would create the DNS, and then you would go here and add them to that DNS setting. Now, if you wanted to go up and set up a template and modify the defaults, let's go ahead and see what that looks like here. Should be the standard for 9.18. Yeah. So if you wanted to go in and set up all of these default options for the logging channels, for the options here, the root hints, etc., you can default all of these, and that way any new appliance set up will automatically default to these new options. So that's how I would recommend doing that moving forward, and that way you just kind of assume that every one you're adding is a resolver, and then lastly you add it to the Galaxy and it assumes everything and you can deploy it. And that's how we do with the dynamic DNS. So now we got everything working. When we start getting to the DHCP testing and others, we're going to see updates to the resource records. And then effectively when we'll see, they'll come in and say that they're from a DNS listener, and we'll see who the owner is. Okay, so that's our, I'll leave the video at that, make it a little shorter on this. I'm going to come up with some other ideas in the next ones for other content, go through some, maybe some templating and some other areas, and then we'll get into some structure again. So thanks, take care, and hope this was short enough. We'll come back with another quick video. Thank you.